Committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. On October 18th, 2019, FDA announced that its independent lab, AMA Analytics, detected asbestos in Johnson & Johnson's talc-based baby powder. In response to FDA's announcement on October 18th, J&J issued a limited recall of 1 lot of its talcum powder. On November 15th, 2019, I sent an invitation to Alex Gorski, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, requesting that he appear before our subcommittee to discuss the public health concerns regarding J&J's baby powder. I am disappointed that J&J has refused to comply with our request. While Mr. Gorski has not refrained from making multiple public statements on this topic, including authoring written statements and speaking with media outlets, he has now avoided voluntarily testifying under oath before Congress. In fact, this subcommittee's very first hearing earlier this year examined possible carcinogens in talc-based products. Johnson & Johnson objected to the hearing, complaining that it had not been invited to participate. In a media release subsequent to our hearing, Johnson & Johnson stated, and I quote, "The subcommittee did not hear the preponderance of evidence that supports the safety of our product." Before today's hearing, we gave Mr. Gorski almost a full month's notice of the subcommittee's interest in his testimony. We wanted Mr. Gorski to come forward with J&J's side of the story, but he declined. We can only speculate as to why I am currently speaking to an empty chair. But here are the facts. There is evidence that for decades, tests have repeatedly found that Johnson & Johnson's talc-based baby powder contained asbestos. More sensitive testing methods than those used by Johnson & Johnson have detected asbestos in talc. In fact, in an internal Johnson & Johnson memo from 1975, employees discuss suppressing the use of sensitive asbestos detection methods, stating, and I quote, "We want to avoid promotion of this approach." But Mr. Gorski is not here to speak to that. There is evidence to suggest that when citizen petitions to the FDA in the late 1980s and early 1990s demanded that J&J label its powder with a cancer warning, the company pushed forward during that same time period with an aggressive marketing plan for communities of color as its sales to Caucasians declined. But Mr. Gorski, unfortunately, is not here to speak to that either. We also have evidence that in 2008, Johnson & Johnson commissioned Research International, a market survey consultant, to conduct a consumer survey to determine public perceptions of its powder's name. The company learned then that women preferred the cornstarch-based powder over the talc-based powder, and that women had a particular aversion to the words talc and talcum, with one respondent even stating, quote, "I don't like what that word brings to mind." Yet, as you can see behind me, the company made an intentional decision to prominently feature cornstarch on the front of its cornstarch-based bottle, while failing to do the same by labeling the word talc on the front of its talc-based baby powder. Unfortunately, Mr. Gorski is not here to speak to that. Yet Mr. Gorski's company has chosen to speak out and push back against every instance over the last 2 months in which asbestos has been detected in samples of Johnson & Johnson's talc-based baby powder, including the FDA's own analysis. At this very moment, I am sending a document request to Johnson & Johnson seeking answers. We are asking the company to explain its decisions to disregard consumer preferences for cornstarch over talc, why the company continues to keep its talc powder on the U.S. market when countries like Canada are issuing findings to its citizens against the use of talc, and why the company refuses to attach an adequate carcinogen warning to the label of its talc-based baby powder, even as generic alternatives do so. This subcommittee will not rest until it has answers to these questions. It's what the American people and public health deserve. I now recognize our colleague, Mr. Comer of Kentucky, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.